Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Kamber Parker Bowden, sponsored by Generational Performance Solutions. I'm Kamber, founder and CEO of GPS, where we bring you strategies to cultivate a high-performing and committed team in a rapidly changing workplace. Whether you're looking to enhance cross-generational communication or navigate generational dynamics in the workplace, you've come to the right place. Today, I am super pumped to have Jesse Matton, Director of Corporate Social Impact Policies at the National Partnership for Women and Families. She's joining us from Richmond, Virginia. And while Jesse has extensive experience in the business world, she has often been at the crossroads between business and community impact, whether empowering economic impact in underserved communities, working with the Global Task Force on pandemic response, or serving in her current role with the National Partnership for Women and Families. Her career is defined by the intersection of business and purpose. And I think everybody listening and watching can tell why we wanted to have you on the show today. Jesse, it's going to be a great conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kamber. I really, really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and we're new friends, which I always love having on the show. So there's a lot that I can learn from you today and a lot that our audience can learn from you. So let's jump right into it, starting with what we like to call a lightning round. So in a few sentences or less, try to answer these quick hitting questions. The first being, what is something that is not on your resume?
Ooh, all right. Quick hitting. I am an extremely curious person. There is not a person, plant, or animal that I am not interested in talking to. It would be my superpower to know every language under the sun, so I can talk to everybody. Channeling my Eliza Thornberry.
Love it. Great answer. What is the best professional advice you've gotten or received from a mentor?
Ooh, from my dad, it has been your manager can often matter more than the work. And that has really helped me on be able to embrace job opportunities with a little bit more intuition and connection with the people that you're going through the hiring process with versus some of the ego drivers as it relates to title and organization and role.
Yeah, well said. And then what is the best book that you've read in the last year, work-related or outside of work?
Ooh, Project Hail Mary. I can't stop talking about this book. It's going to be a movie soon. I love a sci-fi, flawed characters, beautiful friendship. It's a great read.
Nice. Thank you for passing the lightning round with colors. I'm telling you, it's not always that case. People can sometimes forget that it's a lightning round. So thank you. Let's jump into this really awesome conversation. I have to start by just sharing that my team was really, really excited about this, not just me. We talk about what we're about to engage with today often, and it's something that continues to pop up when we do our polls and in our focus groups. And so we really feel like you're going to be able to give us a lot of really great tools that we can share with our audience. So thank you in advance. Let's first start by just talking about your background a little bit. So you have worked at NPWF for almost 4 years now, but you have not always been in the political advocacy industry. Can you tell me a little bit about your career, in the most concise way possible? I know that's probably hard to do, and how your own experiences in the workplace have impacted your career trajectory.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope I can be as helpful as I can. My whole career has really circled around how companies can do more good. And so that is a really simple way of framing that. But really when it comes off to, where I started my career at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on their nonprofit side, that's a very large business association. I worked in the field of corporate social responsibility, and all of my work there was to help companies integrate more resilient, sustainable, and operationalized strategies for social impact, whether that's environmental impact, disaster response, community engagement, and women's economic empowerment, which working on that issue really propelled my passion and kind of interest to further my career into this direction of working in advocacy and the intersection of business and advocacy. And I think one of the things that was unique in that role and being with a business association was what the kind of the peek under the hood that I was able to get being in a really safe space for businesses and seeing, what makes them tick, where does this work live, what are the things that really help them get buy-in on these investments, and the types of, strategies that really put the work into action and actually allow them to invest in the impact and see the impact that they're hoping to make. So being able to dip my toes into the women's economic empowerment sphere, once you get to know a little bit more about the business case, economic case for investing in women, it's pretty phenomenal, and there was no looking back.
Yeah. I mean, I love hearing the intersection and your career trajectory. It makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to come back to how companies can do more good. I like that you started off strong with that. So thanks for kind of setting the stage there. Now let's talk about your organization. You all are leaders in advocating for policies that support working parents across the country. I'm curious, how does the organization put those same values into practice internally? So maybe give a little bit more background on who you all are, and then share with us, how do you transfer some of that into what you actually do with your employees? I think that's something that we all are really curious about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Partnership is an over 50-year-old advocacy and research nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We are working on issues that are central to creating a more equitable society with a specific focus on gender and racial equity. So we really focus on the full arc of women's lives, from healthcare and caregiving to workplace equity and civic engagement. So we have a real deep history in fighting and winning for public policy progress through public and private sector advocacy, research, and analysis. And, we really do root our work in the lived experience of the most marginalized, which is often women, women of color, and women with disabilities. And so kind of jumping off from where I started my career, a lot of what you hear working in women's economic empowerment and is, change starts from the top. And so one of the things that I was so attracted to at the National Partnership was the fact that they have a largely women of color executive office, which is rare at really any organization. And that inspired me because that is very different from my previous workplace. And when we look at our internal workplace policies, it's honestly priceless getting to work with an organization that gets the realities of life, not just for women and women of color who bear the majority of caregiving responsibilities, which we can talk about later, but all workers, and the virtuous cycle that happens when you invest in your workers and their ability to have a career and a life, whether that's kids, pets, parents, community. So we at the National Partnership have an unlimited PTO policy, which, is an interesting framing because that's not always a best practice, because that specific policy really needs to be paired with a thoughtful workplace culture. And so you have to have great leaders that understand how you can respond with that policy, especially when we work with on so many rapid response issues. So, it's not that common that you can see across your colleagues' calendars, like pumpkin patch field trip or have to pick up from the bus stop in the middle of the day. But there is tremendous trust and accountability for our roles and responsibilities, and a lot of discussions around deadlines. So this is, like I said, balanced with a tremendous amount of rapid response work. So there's one of a hard kind of informal element to workplace policies is flexibility. So that is really the name of the game. And then we have some amazing, kind of perks here and there. Caregiving week, where they just give us a week off to really focus on ourselves. We've got, and sometimes things that feel tertiary, like data privacy. I mean, we are very much involved in reproductive rights. And so we have a whole data kind of support system that helps us scrub our internet data and make sure that we're, not as ripe for data brokers, some of these things that just really matter at the end of the day in terms of our mental sanity and ability to show up for work without the fears of the reality of what's happening for women and the criminalization of our health choices for ourselves and our family. And, I'll never forget when I was interviewing for the National Partnership, they allowed me to do a reverse interview, and the colleague broke down in tears talking about the support that her manager had for her when she was facing a caregiving crisis and what that meant for her. And so it's a part of the culture. It's a part of the formalized policies, and it's something we're really proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my jaw is like dropped at this point because the focus on caregiving, I think, is something that we have to dive into more today. And I'm just so excited to dig a little deeper there. But I loved your example of the pumpkin patch too. And that is not uncommon to go around and see that people have lives outside of work. And you mentioned it's part of the culture, but it's also policy. And that is so critical in your work, but also what leaders need to hear today. So let's jump to a very important question, something that I talk a lot about when I travel all over the country, giving keynotes and workshops to organizations. We talk about the declining birth rate in the US, but it's also happening globally. It's not just in the US. Many assume it is primarily about affordability, housing, climate anxiety. I mean, you name it, the list goes on. But even in countries with universal healthcare and generous parental leave like Sweden or South Korea, birth rates continue to fall. So from your perspective at the National Partnership, where you're focused on gender, equity, family support, and workplace policy, what do you think about just this paradox, this issue, this challenge? Because for me, in my perspective, how this is impacting companies is there's an aging workforce that's leaving, and then the younger workers are coming in, but there's not enough of them. And so the declining birth rate is significant. But what's your take on this, just given your work? And I know that was a very long-winded question, so thanks for bearing with me there.
Yeah, no. This is something that we talk about formally and informally across our organization all the time. At the end of the day, being economically empowered does not equate to wanting a family or having kids. And, it must be said that culturally and legally in both the United States and around the world, women's economic empowerment and freedom has been tied to men. And so with more women having economic freedom to manage their own lives, financial decisions, health decisions, comes a shift in what success looks like for anyone, and absolutely challenges the pronatalist, and really now like the entire conservative Republican Party's, vision and what they're working towards and wanting to see. And so, which, gives you a sense of like why there is such an attack on disempowering women and people of color and the LGBT community. And at the end of the day, putting on my national partnership, kind of numbers hat, and the research hat, the falling birth rate does not mean family policies don't work. It shows us where equity gaps remain. And so until caregiving is shared equitably, until childcare is affordable and reliable, and workplaces truly support parents, people will keep weighing the costs of having children and deciding against it. Mm-hmm. The goal isn't to boost numbers, but to build a care economy where everyone has real freedom to choose family and work on their own terms. And the intersectional investments and policies that are needed to address the systemic challenges are not that complicated, but they are vast and expensive. And so in our impatient culture of quick wins and clear solutions, it makes our work that much harder. But we all know that cultural change is not easy. So we keep on keeping on, and there's a lot of conversations to be had and a lot of voices needed at the table.
So many. And I'm going to jump around a little bit here because I just think, again, this is such an important topic. And I loved what you said about this, what I just shared with you. It shows us where the equity gaps are. And you're absolutely right. When you talk about caregiving, and I love the care economy, I'm not sure in my world if I've heard that a ton, but just this morning I was giving a keynote to a large insurance company here in South Carolina, and they're a national company. But we were talking about how Gen X, for example, they are right now kind of stationed between children they're caring for and their aging parents, right? So they're in this like true kind of middle, whereas I'm a millennial and we don't have children, and I'm very much, I have my husband and like that's our family. My parents are healthy enough, knock on wood, that we're not caring for them yet. So we're in a very different kind of predicament, if you will. And so I just think of, when we talk about families and childcare, I'm like, what word am I looking for? In childcare, there's so much more than just thinking of raising and caring for children. It's also caring for aging parents and giving those opportunities and freedoms for people to kind of keep their mental health in check. And so I think a lot of what you do is kind of making sure they have those support, that support and those policies in place. Do you want to speak to that at all, or should I move on to the next question?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, the sandwich generation is what we call it, where you've got children and you have aging parents, and I think one of the things that sticks out for me is the way that was one of the trends that, businesses often survey their employees to support in terms of employee resource groups and in kind of employee conversations. And caregiver is now the most common identity across the entire US workforce.
Wow.
And so not acknowledging that and being thoughtful through public policy is really a disservice to our economy at large. There's a term that we often kind of love to come back to in terms of the cost of doing nothing. And there's truly trillions of dollars being left on the table by not recognizing and strategizing and building both cultural change and supportive workplace policies and supportive public policies to address the caregiving crisis. This is not just about access. This is about affordability. This is about a living wage. This is about equal pay. This is about, so many different levers that come into the fold of, what is really going to lift all boats, what this means on a psychological level. There's amazing research that our team did out of some of this data coming from state public policies in terms of what paid leave did for mental health, and billions of dollars in 1 year for productivity by having a paid leave policy. They did this focused on mental health as well as cardiac health. And just those two specific health elements and having paid leave policies to support people that are in those two categories of having those health needs, billions of dollars are being left on the table and or gained back into the workforce by having supportive paid leave policies.
Yeah. And so on that note, Jesse, like what do you say to corporate partners that might be watching or listening? Like what do you believe the most powerful role they can play in the paid leave scenario that you're describing? Like what can they do that are really tangible things that they can take back with them after this episode?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the most tangible things they can do is set an example and really dive into what are supportive workplace policies that work for you and your company and your workforce. At every size organization, you have different asset levels, different kind of managerial structures, workforce structures, unionized workers, contracted workers, part-time, full-time, thinking holistically, thinking about those that are really the most marginalized in your workforce, the low income, part-time workers is often the greatest place to start. I know diversity, equity, and inclusion as a term has been inappropriately villainized over the last 9 months and more. But paid leave is truly one of the most equitable and inclusive investments that you can take and make. And these investments are not out of reach for even the smallest companies. We recently did research in a project called Leading on Leave. And the biggest difference with large businesses and small and medium-sized businesses that were across the board high road employers that we were looking at that kind of made our final tier of leaders on leave is while the larger businesses had really structured policies that were extremely comprehensive and very supportive, the small and medium-sized businesses were really embracing flexibility and managerial training in a way that was helping them meet the needs of their workforce as well as their business. So, taking a first step is always important in terms of, learning from your peers, talking to your colleagues, talking to your employees, doing an employee survey. I mean, it gets people don't love to do employee surveys, but it's so important to know what your employees actually need and want and where you are really doing well.
Mm-hmm.
So getting that gut check is a really great place to start in terms of building out those policies.
Yeah. I think it's so fascinating, the work that you're doing behind paid leave and really paying attention to caregivers. I think that's so, so important. All right. Hopefully you're loving today's episode. We're going to take a quick break to give you just a little bit of an update on who we are at Generational Performance Solutions. So at GPS, we help organizations navigate generational dynamics in the workplace. And we do that through our main offerings, which include keynotes. So I travel all over North America to give leaders and rising leaders tools and tips that they need to move the needle in their business. We also offer workshops. We have leadership development programs, and we offer facilitator training where we actually license our content to organizations looking to bring this kind of training, generational training, in-house. We do all of this based on our research. So over the last 7 years, we've interviewed more than 15,000 young and experienced professionals across industries, across organizations and demographics. And we take all of that data and we bring it right to you in all of our offerings. So just a personal note, I started this business 7 years ago, and it has been truly a joy to see how we are impacting the workplace. It's not just me. We have a team of 5. We have amazing mentors and advisors, partners, vendors, people who have stepped in and shared their stories over the years, and we would not be here without you. So thank you. If you're interested in learning more about GPS, make sure to follow us on our social media channels, continue listening to this podcast, and sharing the podcast with people that you think might benefit from it. So with that, let's get back to the episode. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy. Let's kind of pivot over to women. Okay, you've talked a lot. You've kind of talked broadly about all parties, but not as much women yet. And let's talk about when you're speaking to women about their experiences at work, specifically working mothers. How do their experiences compare across generations? Has it changed over time? Do you hear the same stories, the same sentiments, or does generation even play a role in their perspectives?
Across generations, we hear a lot of the same themes, juggling caregiving, the pressure of being the default parent, the career penalties that mothers face, the motherhood penalty, as we call it. What's shifted is the willingness to name those challenges out loud and demand better. So younger mothers especially are more likely to expect flexibility, equity, and structural support. That generational shift has power, and it keeps pushing employees and policymakers to recognize that caregiving isn't a private issue. It is a workforce issue. So often this has been seen as a women's issue, and it absolutely is in the fact that women continue to bear the majority of the caregiving responsibilities across their families. It is upwards of $600 billion in value that women are bringing to the care economy. So, and that's not to discount men somewhere around $400 billion. So we're looking at, again, a $1 trillion economic kind of situation here.
Right.
But yeah, the generational shift is really, I think, about power and visibility. And I think that there is also something to say about consumer sentiment and the shift in conscious consumerism, and the younger generation being interested in supporting and buying from companies that are showing up for their workers and their communities in a way that is honorable and sustainable and respects the realities of their workforce and their families and communities.
Yeah. So one thing that I find is just such a challenge is a lot of my peers, a lot of even people on our team, people choose jobs today, and the conversations they have are, if this isn't like the most high paying job, then I should just stay home. Right. And then I know there's some interesting data out there, and I'm not the expert on this, so I'm not even going to try to reiterate what I've heard in the past, but can you speak to that at all? Because there is this, I feel like every day we're seeing a lot of articles about women are kind of going backwards. Again, these are headlines. Women are going backwards, because they are deciding to not they're deciding to leave the workforce because they're met with this kind of impossible situation. So feel free to debunk that. I'm just saying that that's what I'm seeing online. That's kind of what I'm seeing in terms of the narrative. So what's your stance and kind of what's your response to that?
Yeah, no, we're being put in a really hard situation. There's no doubt about that. And kind of coming back to your salary point, I think because so many women and families recognize the realities of the brokenness of the system when you do need care, it does come down to dollars being in the bank to be able to hold your family together and yourself together when you have a health crisis. I mean, we are living in a day where one day off when you're sick or your child's sick or your parent's sick can make you lose your job, and the entire economic, rug is pulled out from underneath you. So if you're not, being thoughtful about if you're going into jobs where a lot of people have, don't necessarily know to ask about the benefits to the detail that they should, and don't necessarily get transparency into those benefits, that's a huge challenge in itself. That, it really does come down to dollars. And so when it looks, when you're looking at that, it's hard to argue with why women are making these decisions.
Right.
They're between a rock and a hard place for sure.
They are.
And, we're living in a state where childcare is more expensive across the entire country than rent. And that is just not sustainable. That is not sustainable for anyone.
It's not. And I'm glad you brought that up, not because, it's a positive thing, but because I have friends who, they just found out they were pregnant and they're signing up for daycare and childcare if they can even afford it, or they're going to their parents who are, in retirement, and not all grandparents can do that, can support. And so then they're also met with this impossible feat almost, where it's some people, it's before they even get pregnant, they're putting their names in the hat and they might get it. They might get into a daycare. And then you don't even, that doesn't even touch the conversation about what childcare workers are paid. And that's a whole other conversation. But the system is so broken, to your point. Mm-hmm. And as somebody without children, I have a lot of stories from my friends, my peers, my family. But if there's anything that you want to share to that, I know I'm kind of going off, throwing you a little bit of a curveball, but I just think that this is so important not to bring it up.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. It's just there's so much to say on the caregiving front. It's nearly impossible to drill in on just, I think one of the things, let me back up. I think one of the things that makes this work so hard at times in the movement and in collective change is the intersectional nature of this. The fact that women are not paid equally as men, the fact that there's occupational segregation tremendously when seen in the caregiving system and in low wage jobs across the economy, that puts women of color, who are often the breadwinner, more often than not the breadwinners for their family. The domino effect is just really scary. It's really, really scary. And so that is one of the reasons why it's so important, in our opinion, to bring that, to center women of color and women with disabilities in the conversation, because otherwise you're putting a small Band-Aid on a really big problem versus really tackling the problem in itself in a comprehensive way. So, it doesn't make the work any easier, but it does help, I think, bring more people to the table, because no matter where you are in your life, whether you have children, have aging parents, are in a low wage job, are a contracted worker who doesn't have access to benefits, there is something in this puzzle that's challenging you from living a full, prosperous, thriving life with a supportive job, something that we believe every single worker should have access to. So yeah, it's, the one thing I can say that I am appreciative of is the continued recognition of just what a crisis this is,
Yeah.
and that this is not a women's issue. This is not a, this is truly an issue that relates to every single family across this country and every single employer. So that's bringing companies of all sizes to the table to talk about solutions on both the state level and the federal level. So you see a lot of action on the public policy side, and you continue to see companies pushing the envelope on what they can provide their employees.
On that note, Jesse, I do want to go into what other companies are doing. So I think this is where you were heading. But in the 2025 Leading on Leave report, the national partnership highlighted a cohort of companies setting new benchmarks in paid leave policy. So you were kind of, I think, heading in the direction of what companies are kind of doing as the gold standard. What strategies or policies do you suggest for companies who don't necessarily have the best resources for paid parental leave or bigger budget benefits? So like somebody who's listening and watching that might not have those resources, what are some steps that you would recommend they take? And then if there's anything else you want to share about that Leading on Leave report.
That's great. Yeah. So it kind of circles back to some of the things I said earlier in regards to, getting a gut check with your employees is a great place to start. Doing an employee survey, doing a peer benchmarking kind of overview on what your competitors are doing, what leading businesses are doing, and seeing some of the innovative ways that companies are trying to show up for their employees and the partners that are in your community to help make that happen. So a lot of times there's some interesting state programs going on, childcare partnerships, et cetera. One of the things is our approach here at the National Partnership is to set a North Star. So while creating on-ramps for employers that have fewer resources. So that can mean encouraging incremental steps like expanding job protection, for example. A lot of small businesses are not covered by the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA. So 50 employer businesses and smaller, they don't have protected unpaid leave. And so that's one example. And ensuring equitable access for your workforce. So that means thinking about, your part-time employees, your contracted employees, what type of resources do they have access to versus just your full-time employees, and building towards longer leave over time. You do not have to start with the most perfect solution. Incremental steps are better than no steps at all. And so I think the key is pairing ambition with inclusivity so that no employer feels left out of the conversation.
You said pair ambition with inclusivity. Like that. Yeah, great, really tangible tips that people can take with them. So thank you. And I love, you can build over time. It's not something that has to be perfect tomorrow. And I think that maybe gives people a little bit more the feeling like they can do it over time. Because as you said, this is something everybody should have access to. And it does not all need to look the same. And people can look at the report that you all distributed, right, to kind of see who are those companies that are ranked really high.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Quick shout out to Accenture, Levi's, PayPal, L'Oreal. Those were our large businesses. And then the pad climbing, Center Road Solutions, and Higher Art were the small and medium-sized businesses. They are all across the country.
Awesome.
And the last thing I'll say is, take yourself to the policy table. There is a outsized influence that comes from business associations on being the voice of business. And particularly for small and medium-sized businesses, they are often a reason that they say paid leave policies don't work. And so coming to the table, sharing your experience, talking about how and why, and it could work for you and what you need to make that a reality, in terms of all of the different kind of pieces of that, from employee staffing to the way the financial kind of reinvestment comes with tax breaks and things like that. Just being a part of the conversation is a huge part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is really something that a lot of small and mid-sized businesses I know that we work with are not doing. And so I love that you shouted out some of these companies. So, leaders who are listening, take yourself to the policy table. I think that's such a great takeaway. As we start to wrap up here with just a few more questions, one thing that we're hearing a lot, both anecdotally and in some research, is that millennial dads are spending more time with their kids than previous generations. Is this something that you witness in your line of work? And if so, how do you think companies can create policies that benefit all working parents? I'll just share one brief thing. I have several men in my life, friends, my husband, who, all get pretty significant paternity leave, and they're afraid to take it. Not everybody, but a lot of them are afraid to take it because it's definitely like industry specific. If you're in financial services and you're a man and you take paternity leave, like, good luck. People are going to judge you for it. That's how they feel. Similar to like a sick day, right? Or, any kind of mental health day. So that's a little bit of the angle of that question, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a fascinating conversation too. So we absolutely see a shift in expectations among fathers. More dads want to be hands-on from the start, and that's a positive cultural change. But companies need to back that up with policy. So offering equal, non-transferable parental leave to all parents and encouraging men to take it, having managers set that expectation. Sometimes we see companies actually have mandatory leave where all employees are expected to take X number of days throughout the year. It normalizes caregiving as a shared responsibility. And so that's a part of how we dismantle the stigma and make sure workplace supports don't just reinforce old gender norms. Paid Leave for All did some really interesting polling early this year. And one of the kind of major takeaways was that this was a poll specifically with men, over 1,000 male registered voters with over samples of dads, Black, Hispanic, AAPI, and Gen Z men, is that they clearly link family to their masculinity and nearly universally support a host of federal family policies, including more than 90% in favor of paid leave, affordable childcare, and affordable long-term care for aging and disabled family members. These are some of the highest polling numbers that we've ever seen on these issues.
I imagine.
But the reality is that like the numbers as of today in terms of what men are experiencing is still really dire. Like to your point, half of men in the workforce expect to need time to care for sick, disabled, or older family member, which is the same share as women. In 2023, for example, nearly 3 million men were single parents and more than 333,000 men were parenting in same-sex couples. And that's important because oftentimes parental leave policies may be framed in terms of primary caregiver and secondary caregiver, which is really secondary caregiver is too often code for fathers and for adoptive and foster parents, which particularly impacts same-sex couples. And the really staggering numbers that I have found is that one study found that 1 in 20 fathers in professional jobs took more than 2 weeks off for their recent child, and a staggering 3 out of 4 took 1 week or less. For their kid. I mean,
I can think of like 10 people right now where that was the case. They like went in after 3 days at home.
Yep. And, there is absolutely no shame in that either, which is another reason to reinforce the flexibility piece, because oftentimes it's really important for families to be able to figure out that balance and structure that they need for their own household. But, low income fathers face an even higher barriers. Nearly 60% of fathers reported taking 0 weeks of paid time away from work after the birth or adoption of a child. And that was with disadvantaged families. So it's in the past 30 years, we've seen the numbers shift dramatically, but more than 1/3 still take no leave.
Yeah. Wow. So many interesting facts there. I'm really glad you dropped some of that data in here. You also mentioned, old kind of caregiving gender norms. And I do think that ties back to this generational work that we do. Often when leaders say things like, well, this is how we've always done it, or back in my day. And that is the old guard. That's the old way of doing things. And so I love there's this shift that's happening, but it's not, I would have to guess it's not making a dent in some of these equity, some of the equity that you're that we've been talking about today, right? Like it's maybe helping, but it's still at the end of the day, women are primarily these primary caregivers, and it's not always, the system is still broken, right? Like it's not changing things so completely. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. I do want to talk one last, in our last few minutes, about looking ahead and what is happening in the future of social impact. So what emerging issue or trend in this space, whether it's climate justice, caregiving infrastructure, digital first benefits, whatever it is, what are you watching closely that might become the next frontier in meaningful private sector partnership for gender and economic equity?
Yep, absolutely. It's a fascinating and frustrating time to be watching the shifting sands of business and in response to this administration's attacks on DEI and climate regulations and so much more. But care infrastructure remains a top priority. So that trend is not going to go away. Childcare, paid leave, elder care, because those are so foundational to a functional economy, workforce, and to gender and economic equality. So that trend is here to stay until we have solutions that are coming to life. And we will continue to see more states pass paid leave. We will continue to see more state action while we're continuing to face some really hard federal policy traction. But I think also we're watching how digital first benefits and AI and flexible work models are shaping the future of work. Importantly, how companies are starting to see climate justice, caregiving, and as intersectional issues of equity and resilience. So really kind of that thoughtful nature is opening, some thinking and strategizing around what can be really taken into account in terms of investments. And the next frontier is building partnerships that connect those dots too. That is really a growing and emerging exciting place to be looking. And we're excited for the folks that are coming to the table with us. And then business, and because workers don't live their lives in silos, like policies and business strategies should not either. So I think there's just like a natural kind of evolution to that. And then, I've shared about this before, but like the intersectional nature of these issues often challenges quick fixes. But, we're dedicated to providing high quality research that continues to inform people around the economic case, the health case that really makes a difference in the lives of women and the lives of all workers. And so we remain really hopeful and prepared for the moment, no matter how hard these times are right now. And I think more than anything, one of the things that I have been so appreciative and excited to see, as much as I didn't want to see this moment happen, is how businesses are showing up as a firewall with the failure on the government public policy side and some of the attacks on women. So they are not built nor meant to be this social infrastructure of our lives and the support systems where we get healthcare and get benefits and have access to paid leave, but they are increasingly so. And I am so proud to see how companies have innovated when it comes to healthcare access and making sure that all their employees and their families have access to healthcare where, if they're living in states where it's illegal or banned or have, healthcare deserts, which is absolutely a huge thing as it particularly relates to maternal healthcare. So, it's that is one thing that I'm just endlessly appreciative of for the high road employers that are really showing up in moments like this that we would not have typically expected them to be the firewall for their workers.
Yeah. And I think that's a takeaway for me, right? Is there are people who are showing up and they're showing up to the policy table. They're showing up to put in the work for their people. And so shout out to those companies, but also know that if you're listening and watching, you can also be that for your employees. Jesse, this has been such an informative episode. I think we could keep going for hours, but is there any final words of wisdom or pieces of advice you would share that we have not covered yet today?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I just
We
think
covered a
that,
lot.
continue being curious. These things can be overwhelming and complicated, and health benefits are not a fun read for anyone. The legalese is complicated. Turn to your community and don't forget that just like human connection is really so much of what drives the progress that's happening here. And people understanding and having empathy for the roads that you're walking. So thank you so much, Kamber, for having such important conversations on workplace culture and including us. We are really, really happy to have been able to participate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse. This has been very eye-opening for me personally, and I think for all of our audience. Thank you again for joining us on The Great Retention. Before you go, remember this: the generational landscape is shifting, and today's workforce is not the same workforce we once knew. Our mission is to help you save time and money by identifying these shifts and demystifying generational differences through our workshops, leadership programs, and workforce planning. Contact us today at GPS if you're interested in transforming your multi-generational team, and we can drive your business towards long-term sustainability and success. And last but not least, make sure you go to your favorite bookstore and check out my new book, which just released this fall, The Generational Advantage, available where all books are sold. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.